Accusatory shouts shattered the night silence in the demonic cult's lands. Someone had been discovered, and the betrayal exposed. The young man ran through the dark forest, ignoring the exhaustion that burned his lungs. His pursuers, however, seemed to be toying with him, mocking his shortness of breath. Frustration grew on the fugitive's face. The enemy's mockery indicated that they were in total control of the situation, almost bored with the chase. Physical fatigue finally took its toll. With a misstep, the boy's foot caught on an exposed root in the path. Balance was lost. Shock took over his gaze as he realized that the fall was inevitable and dangerous. As he plummeted down the slope, his mind spun in confusion. He didn't understand the reason for the attack, since he had given up the academy and posed no threat. The impact against the ground was brutal. His body ached, but the indignation at being hunted for no apparent reason burned even more. A cold voice cut through the air, revealing the cruel truth. His mere existence as a potential heir was reason enough for that death sentence. The boy clenched his fist in the dirt, cursing his luck and his supposedly humble lineage. The injustice of the situation enraged him deeply. He tried to get up, surrounded by dust and the approaching enemies. The assassins offered a quick death, treating the act as an inevitable mercy. Looking up, the young man realized the extent of the ambush. Masked figures surrounded him in the trees, confirming his suspicions about who had orchestrated it all. Understanding turned into pure rage. His eyes shone with a fierce intensity in the face of the betrayal that was now clear. One of the assassins addressed him as young Master Cheon. The tone was one of pure mockery, laughing at the futile escape attempt that had just occurred. Surrounded and with no way out, Cheon faced the drawn blades around him. The silent forest became a deadly arena where he was at a disadvantage. The young master shouted his confusion and revolt to the four winds. He couldn't accept that. Even without ambitions or real chances at the academy, they still demanded his life as payment. The leader of the pursuers fixed his gaze on the target. He wasn't just there to capture, but to deliver a final message to the young master. His subordinates raised their blades, demanding the boy's life. The order was clear. The execution should be immediate and without mercy. The young man felt a chill run down his spine. However, the cruel words about his humble origins hurt more than the fear of imminent death. The dishonorable mention of his mother ignited a flame of fury within him. The paralyzing terror was suddenly replaced by uncontrollable indignation. With a trembling hand, he squeezed the small object he was carrying against his chest. It was a pathetic defense against swords, but he refused to give up. The assassin noticed the attempt at resistance, and his eyes narrowed in mockery. He seemed amused by the audacity of that amateur stance. The fugitive held his weapon with both hands, trembling visibly. To the experienced enemy, it was obvious that the boy had no idea how to fight. The masked man watched the pathetic scene for a moment. There was no need for caution against such an inexperienced and vulnerable opponent. Without warning, the gang attacked in unison. They jumped from the shadows, surrounding the prey on all sides to ensure there was no escape. Surprisingly, the young man reacted. Moved by the pure instinct for survival, he dodged clumsily from the deadly blades that sought his flesh. One of the assassins slashed the air violently. The attack was quick and precise, intended to end that unexpected resistance in one fell swoop. The boy recoiled in panic, his eyes wide with terror. He could barely keep up with the speed of the blows that whizzed dangerously around him. The enemy's onslaught was so strong that it made him lose his balance momentarily. The chaos of battle enveloped everything, and every move was a gamble for life. However, the young man's luck ran out. A strong hand grabbed his clothes brutally, lifting him off the ground and interrupting his desperate defense. The captor let out a dark laugh close to his face. The brief moment of resistance had failed, and the young master was now completely at his mercy. The young fugitive tightened his grip on the weapon's handle, deciding that this would not be his end. The masked pursuers, however, were caught off guard by the prey's sudden reaction. With a desperate move, the boy plunged the blade into the neck of the nearest enemy. The rest of the gang paused for a moment, stunned to see one of their own mortally wounded. The assassin's body collapsed on the soaked ground, staining the mud with his blood. Amidst the exhaustion, A maniacal smile appeared on the young man's face as he saw the result of his attack. The enemies realized too late that the boy's apparent weakness hid a lethal trap. Not wanting to give any more chances, another masked man advanced with his sword in hand, cutting through the air. The attack was brutal. A powerful kick hit the fugitive squarely, throwing him violently backward. The impact left the boy on the ground, gasping and unable to breathe momentarily. The pursuer's gaze showed no mercy, only a cold and calculating fury. Terror filled the young man's eyes as he realized he couldn't avoid the fatal blow. An agonizing scream echoed through the rainy forest, muffled only by the sound of the storm under the moonlight. The fugitive coughed violently, tasting the metallic tang of his own blood rising in his mouth. The assassin pressed his boot against the victim's chest, ensuring there would be no more surprises or escapes. The young fugitive dug his fingers into the earth, bitterly realizing that his resources had completely run out. His pursuer didn't hesitate, crushing the boy's chest with his boot while sentencing him to an imminent and painful end. With the victim immobilized, the masked man prepared his blade for the coup de grace. There was nowhere left to run. The assassin sighed wearily, treating this execution as just another bureaucratic task to be completed. However, an intense and sudden light exploded onto the scene, breaking through the darkness of the forest. The indifference in the executioner's eyes was instantly replaced by a paralyzing shock. He realized the danger too late. A violent and deafening impact struck the area, pulverizing the threat before anyone could understand what was happening. The executor's body was brutally torn apart. The young man, still on the ground, watched in disbelief as the one who was about to kill him died instantly. Pieces of armor and sword flew through the air, passing dangerously close to the stunned boy's face. The rest of the gang retreated in panic, frantically searching for the origin of that devastating power that decimated their leader. Firm footsteps landed on the ground, emanating a bluish energy that clashed completely with that rustic environment. One of the masked men detected the presence in the rear and, in desperation, alerted his companions to the enemy's new position. The group quickly turned around, wielding their swords against the solitary silhouette that now blocked the path in the forest. The mysterious figure didn't seem intimidated, letting his electric aura crackle menacingly in front of the assassins. It was a stranger wearing modern clothes. Enveloped in lightning and with his arms crossed, he stared at the group with absolute confidence. The masked assassin broke out in a cold sweat. The brutal and sudden death of his companion left him paralyzed with momentary shock. The newcomer, however, only adjusted his stance. Electricity danced around his body as he prepared for combat. Regaining his aggression, one of the pursuers advanced. He ran with his sword in hand, determined to eliminate the new threat immediately. The man in the cap remained still. Energy crackled around him, accumulating as he awaited the exact moment of impact. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash. The world seemed to slow down in the face of the explosive speed of that movement. The masked men's attacks only cut through the air. They found themselves disoriented, unable to locate the target that had been there a second before. Confusion turned to horror when blood splattered. The assassin realized too late that the enemy's speed was lethal. The stranger was just an electric blur. His form shimmered and disappeared, leaving trails of blue light that deceived human vision. Panic set in among the group. They shouted at each other, terrified by the fact that the opponent had disappeared before their eyes. Fear filled the pursuer's eyes. He desperately tried to track the invisible threat before it was his turn. The impact was devastating. The stranger reappeared only to deliver a fatal blow, spreading destruction as the rest of the group retreated. The sound of the wind being cut was the only warning. The speed was such that the attack seemed to come from all directions at the same time. The last man's eyes widened. The reality of the situation dawned on him. There was no way to defend against that. The movement was relentless. The kinetic force of the attack swept across the battlefield like a red storm. The swordsman's hand trembled violently on the hilt of his weapon. Fear completely dominated him, for he knew that his blade was useless. The young fugitive watched the scene, paralyzed by shock. Blood ran down his face as he witnessed the brutal end of his tormentors. Realizing they had no chance against that power, the remaining pursuers screamed for an immediate retreat. They ran desperately away from that monster. One of the assassins tried to escape through the air, jumping high to put distance between himself and the threat. He believed that the height would save him. However, the stranger had no intention of letting anyone leave. He reached out his hand, accumulating a crackling and lethal blue energy. The power beam hit the target head-on. The assassin's body exploded in the air, turning the escape attempt into a rain of blood. The man in modern clothes smiled sinisterly. He seemed to take a disturbing pleasure in the violence he had just unleashed. The injured boy widened his eyes, unable to process what he was seeing. The brutality of this supposed savior was as terrifying as that of the enemies. He trembled, his gaze fixed on the massacre. Fear took over, as the strength displayed before him defied any known logic. With silence returning to the forest, the young man remained stunned. Exhausted and wounded, he could barely comprehend that he was still alive. The mysterious savior, however, seemed indifferent to the boy's trauma. He just calmly checked his watch, worried about the time. Then, he reached for his belt and pulled out a technological device. The object glowed with a blue light, completely out of place in the surrounding environment. He approached the fallen boy. The stranger commented that he needed to act fast before the young man's injuries became fatal. Without asking permission, he brought an injector close to the fugitive's neck. The boy, too weak to react, just watched the object approach. The device was pressed firmly against the skin. The stranger administered the contents immediately, focused only on fulfilling his objective. Task completed. The hooded man smiled with satisfaction, holding the empty injector as if it were just another routine job. The stranger knelt beside the fallen body. He observed the boy with a disturbing familiarity, addressing him with an old and respectful title. With an enigmatic smile, the man left a final instruction. He seemed confident that the young man, even on the verge of death, would find a solution to the dilemma on his own. His task there was complete. The stranger stood up as a crackling energy began to envelop his body, signaling his imminent departure. In an instant, the man disappeared completely in a vertical beam of light. The young fugitive was left behind, alone in the silent wilderness. Consciousness slowly returned to the boy. His mind, still clouded by pain and trauma, struggled to process the last words he had heard before blacking out. Suddenly, reality hit him. His eyes opened abruptly, filled with visceral shock as he realized that his mind was still functioning. Images of an ancient era flooded his thoughts. He visualized the slow and disciplined evolution of martial arts through the passage of centuries. While the history of monks and studies passed through his mind, the young man tried to rationalize his current situation. He clearly remembered the fatal wound in his stomach and the rain soaking him. The vision explained the power of those ancient warriors. They were techniques capable of destroying rocks with bare hands, granting strength far beyond ordinary human capacity. Many aspired to become disciples of these legends. However, the boy's attention was diverted to a repulsive physical sensation. A black, sticky substance covered his skin. While rival factions arose in his mind, an artificial voice interrupted the flow of memories. It called him user, demanding his immediate attention. The young man tried to locate the source of the sound. There was no one nearby in physical reality, which made that auditory presence even more alarming and confusing. The mental narrative spoke about the rise of a demon lord. The boy, however, realized in terror that the sound was not coming from outside, but vibrating directly inside his skull. With a violent jolt, he truly woke up. The forest scenery and the visions had disappeared, replaced by the unexpected comfort of a bed in a closed room. The fugitive looked at his own hands in disbelief. Against all odds and memories of fatal injuries, he realized that he was still alive. The young fugitive regained consciousness, feeling his mind cloudy and his body strange. A wave of nausea overwhelmed him immediately, forcing him to bend over as his body reacted violently. As he caught his breath, he noticed something wrong. A black, viscous substance clung to his fingers. The boy opened his clothes and found with revulsion that his entire body was bathed in that filthy sludge. Suddenly, something interrupted his moment of disgust, freezing him in place. In a reflex of pure survival, he jumped away from the bed, shouting into the void and demanding to know who was there. His eyes scanned every corner of the room in panic, but there was no one visible. It was then that he realized the origin of the sound. The voice was not coming from the environment, but echoing inside his own head. The invisible entity confirmed the boy's deduction, addressing him by a strange and impersonal title. The fugitive demanded to know the intruder's identity, receiving the explanation that it was directly connected to his brain. The illogical answer made the young man scream in frustration, unable to understand what was happening. He tried to repeat the name he heard, confusing the technological terminology with something legendary. The voice confirmed his designation. Terror took over the protagonist's gaze as he assimilated what he believed to be the truth. His legs lost their strength in the face of the revelation, and he collapsed heavily to the ground. Trembling with fear and reverence, the young man questioned whether he was truly in the presence of the ancient demonic divinity. A doctor, known as Bayek, was being hastily escorted across the courtyard. The guard guiding him seemed eager to reach their destination. As they walked, the guard reported the gravity of the situation. There was a tone of guilt in his posture as he admitted a security breach had occurred. The guard's frustration overflowed. He never imagined the enemies would be bold enough to separate him from his charge and attempt something so direct. Dr. Bayek listened to the details with concern. Considering the assassin squad involved, he knew finding anyone alive would be a true miracle. Suddenly, the walk ceased. Something in the scene ahead captured the doctor's attention, interrupting his somber thoughts. The guard stopped short, in disbelief. The air escaped his lungs in a gasp of shock at the sight unfolding before him. The cold ground was covered in corpses. To the surprise of those arriving, it wasn't the protected one who had fallen, but the assassins sent to kill him. The guard observed the carnage in disbelief. The scene was a silent testament to a brutal battle where the victim had become the executioner. The masked aggressors lay lifeless in pools of blood. Their weapons, still in hand, were useless against the target they underestimated. In the distance, the guard spotted a fallen figure. Panic returned, and he ran desperately toward his young master's body. The boy was lying on the ground, motionless. Despite the violence around him, he seemed to have fainted, but his body was strangely intact. The doctor and guard examined the young man with perplexity. What they saw didn't align with the logic of such a lethal attack. The evidence of the confrontation was undeniable. The boy's clothes showed clear tears where a sword had pierced him, suggesting a mortal wound. Dr. Bayek frowned, intrigued. The situation was too complex, involving political disputes and an inexplicable survival that could attract the patriarch's attention. However, that wasn't the place for conjecture. They decided it was imperative to remove the young man from there and take him to a safe location immediately. The young man shouted desperately, asking if that voice belonged to the great machine who supposedly saved him from danger. However, the entity didn't respond as he expected, leaving a confused silence in the air. The voice returned the question with an unknown term, user, which left the boy completely disoriented about who he was talking to. He realized, stunned, that the presence in his mind wasn't the divinity he imagined. Ignoring his confusion, the impersonal voice simply requested permission to proceed with the process while the young man tried to understand what was happening. Suddenly, a bluish energy began to run through the protagonist's body, making his eyes glow intensely. A wave of power and information invaded his senses abruptly and overwhelmingly. The physical sensation was unbearable. The boy's stomach churned violently, and he put his hands to his mouth, trying to contain the nausea. His body rejected the sudden intrusion, and he ended up vomiting on the wooden floor, unable to control the reflex. Coughing and still on his knees, he heard the voice explain that it was a side effect of the data transfer. The dizziness overcame him. The young man fell seated, putting his hand to his forehead as he tried to stabilize his spinning mind. The voice confirmed the existence of thousands of microscopic machines in his body. The young man stared at his own hand, in disbelief at the revelation. Letting out a heavy sigh, he lowered his head, feeling the weight of exhaustion and those absurd pieces of information. Based on what he had just learned, he questioned whether that artificial intelligence could leave his body if he wished. The situation seemed hopeless. The protagonist lamented his luck, remembering that, in addition to that, his half-brothers were still trying to assassinate him. Cheon woke up with a heavy sigh, his mind still confused by the recent events and the strange voice in his head. The sudden sound of knocking on the door interrupted his thoughts, announcing an unexpected visit. Frightened and believing that the machine was still talking, the young man shouted in panic, ordering absolute silence to the invisible voice. Realizing the absurdity of the situation, he quickly hid under the covers, trying to disguise his erratic behavior. The door opened, and the guard entered accompanied by an elderly doctor, both alerted by the commotion. The guard rushed to check on Cheon's condition, but recoiled immediately, gagging at an unbearable odor. As the man covered his nose in disgust, Cheon realized embarrassedly that the smell came from the impurities expelled by his own body. The old doctor, however, seemed less bothered by the stench and more interested in the patient's vitality. Recognizing the young master from a previous encounter, the doctor initiated a cordial conversation before the examination. With professionalism, the elder leaned over the bed and asked for Cheon's arm to check his pulse. His experienced fingers landed on the boy's wrist, seeking to read the flow of internal energy. In the next instant, the doctor's eyes widened in absolute shock at what he felt. The reaction was so violent that it alarmed the guard, who feared the worst at the doctor's incredulous expression. The guard, confused and tense, demanded an immediate explanation for this sudden behavior. The doctor, regaining his composure, touched his beard and laughed, suspecting the young man had ingested some miraculous elixir. The guard reacted with total disbelief at the doctor's words. That diagnosis seemed impossible given the patient's known fragility. The doctor, however, maintained his statement seriously. He declared that the boy's body was now in perfect condition to learn martial arts, leaving the young man stunned. Cheon observed the dark substance on his hands and clothes. He understood that this foul residue was the toxins and impurities that had been violently expelled from his system. The revelation left him momentarily paralyzed. The process was not just a cure, but a complete purification of his physical essence. Recovering from the shock, the young man decided to reactivate the system's auditory interface. The internal response came immediately, confirming that communication had been re-established. The artificial voice detailed the profound structural changes. It explained how the blood vessels and musculature had been reconfigured to support the flow of energy. The boy swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that information. His body had ceased to be a burden and had become a potential weapon. A sly smile formed on his face. Fear gave way to ambition as he realized the possibilities that lay before him. However, caution was necessary in the face of rival sects. He concluded that he needed to keep the existence of the nanomachines a secret, confident that the medicine of this era would never discover the truth. Outside, the doctor reassured the escort. He attested to the young man's perfect health, prescribing only simple herbs to replenish his energies, without suspecting the technological intervention. The doctor prepared to leave, ending his visit. What seemed to be a deathbed had become the cradle of an inexplicable physical rebirth. The timing of this recovery was crucial. The renowned Academy of Demonic Arts was about to begin its admission cycle, a rare event that occurred only every 10 years. This was the stage where the competition became fiercer. Talented young people from all over the cult would gather to test their skills and compete for the hierarchy through strength. The candidates for the lesser priesthood and the heirs of the great families would be present. However, Cheon's body now rivaled in physical potential with any of the young masters of the 6 sects. The prospect of the upcoming challenge amused the protagonist. He knew that his entry into the academy, now with his body restored and a powerful secret, would make the dispute much more interesting. Cheon woke up with a sudden jolt. Noticing that the doctor did not react to the voice in his head, the young man felt immense relief that his secret remained safe. He knew he needed absolute caution. Recalling that this man belonged to the dangerous poison sect, Cheon decided that he could never let them find out about the nanomachine. Dr. Bayek, however, remained silent, stroking his beard. There was something in the boy's diagnosis that defied his understanding and left him intrigued. Oblivious to the doctor's internal doubts, the guard expressed his gratitude with a radiant smile, happy only to see the young master recovered. As he withdrew, Baek's mind continued to work. He questioned internally how it was possible for someone to go through such a complete and sudden physical transformation. The doctor recalled the boy's reputation. Cheon had always been considered a lost cause, destined to be discarded for his inability to learn martial arts. In the sect's memory, he was just a fragile and untalented child, whose existence seemed irrelevant to the future of the cult. But Baek reconsidered his prejudices. Despite the humble origin of the boy's mother, the blood of the sect leader undeniably ran strong in those veins. The doctor concluded that perhaps the leader himself had intervened in secret. If that were the case, the academy was about to become a stage for unpredictable events. Back in the room, Cheon let out a long sigh of accumulated tension. It seemed that, for now, he had managed to deceive everyone about the origin of his cure. With the immediate danger gone, he could focus on his own sensations. Something felt fundamentally different and more powerful inside him. The guard remained in the room, watching the young master with a firm posture, although something in his expression suggested discomfort. Cheon raised his hand, fascinated by his own vitality. He was trying to understand the extent of the changes his body had undergone during unconsciousness. The moment of admiration, however, was abruptly interrupted. The guard, covering his nose in disgust, reminded the young man that there was an urgent hygienic priority before any celebration. Cheon smiled sheepishly, finally noticing the unbearable odor of the impurities expelled by his skin. A bath was, in fact, the first mission of his new life. Cheon remained still in the bathtub, letting the steam and silence fill the environment. His mind, however, was working fast. He brushed the sweat from his forehead, trying to organize the flood of recent information. The warmth of the water helped clear his thoughts. The voice in his mind detailed the system's repair capabilities. It guaranteed that it could treat everything from sword cuts to damage to internal organs. That revelation made the young man pause. The promise of such comprehensive recovery aroused a dangerous curiosity in him. He stared at the open palm of his hand. If that was true, he needed practical and immediate proof. With a decisive movement, Cheon positioned the sharp blade against his skin. The cold glint of the metal contrasted with the warmth of the bath. The pain was sharp as he slid the edge, staining the water red. The system detected the damage and instantly initiated the emergency protocol. The shock of pain soon turned to astonishment. A soft light enveloped his hand, bringing a tingling sensation where there had been burning before. The skin began to move on its own, stretching to close the opening. The regeneration process was visible to the naked eye. In moments, the bleeding stopped completely. The deep cut disappeared, leaving the skin intact as if nothing had happened. Cheon watched the swirling water in disbelief. The speed of healing surpassed any medicine or technique he knew. He sank his face into the water, stunned. The implications of that power were too vast to be ignored. The young man questioned whether he would really have total control over those miraculous abilities. It seemed too valuable a resource for someone like him. His reverie was interrupted by the need to get out. He stood up, covering himself as he realized he was no longer alone. An elderly maid entered the room bringing clean clothes. Cheon accepted the offer, returning to the reality of his position in the house. The old servant finished adjusting his clothes, scolding him for saying nonsensical things again. She clearly didn't care about the young man's murmurs about machines and systems. Alone in the vast library, Cheon felt momentarily lost. He had access to the place but didn't know where to start his search among so many shelves full of ancient knowledge. He turned his attention to the books around him. Fortunately, he wouldn't have to read them one by one in the traditional way, as he carried a guide within him. The young man reached out and pulled a random manual from the shelf. It was time to test the system's learning and scanning capabilities in this new environment. Holding the text firmly, he issued a mental command to the nanomachine. The order was simple: start scanning the content immediately. His fingers moved quickly, flipping through the pages rapidly. To an observer, it would seem like just an impatient gesture, but he was visually recording every character. The information flowed directly into his mind. The optical scanner processed the text instantly, converting ancient knowledge into understandable digital data. He closed the book with a dry thud. The system confirmed that the scan was complete and the manual's content had been successfully stored. Cheon confirmed the procedure with the entity in his mind. The system then asked if he wanted to proceed with the direct transfer of knowledge to the brain. Suddenly, a sharp shock ran through his head. The transfer of martial data was not a smooth or painless process like simple reading. He gritted his teeth as a wave of electrical energy invaded his nervous system. The pain was intense enough to tear an involuntary scream from him. His legs weakened and he had to lean on the table to avoid falling. His whole body trembled with the sudden impact of the forced assimilation of knowledge. Sweat ran down his face as the sensation subsided. He gasped, trying to catch his breath and composure after the violent shock. Still recovering, he heard the machine's cold explanation of the facts and side effects. The young man just accepted the technical justification with sarcastic resignation. Exhausted, Cheon collapsed into the nearest chair. The process worked, but it demanded a physical price that he would need to learn to manage if he wanted to continue. Cheon touched his own face, still feeling the residual effects of the process. The sharp pain had disappeared, leaving only a strange feeling of numbness. Suddenly, understanding hit him. The information wasn't just in a book, it was etched directly into his mind with crystal clarity. The young man laughed nervously, in disbelief at his own reality. How was it possible that years of learning had been compressed into a single instant? Still in the library, he mentally reviewed the absorbed content. There were no errors or gaps. The knowledge was perfect and accessible. A shiver of excitement ran down his spine. The cold sweat on his forehead now mixed with a smile of pure confidence. His lips trembled as the smile widened. The power he so craved was finally within his reach. Cheon walked to the outer courtyard, leaving the library behind. The open air seemed refreshing in light of his new perspective. He clenched his fist tightly, feeling the tension in his muscles. The theory was in his mind. Now it was time to test the practice. Assuming a firm combat stance, the young man felt an unprecedented clarity of purpose. His path to strength was finally laid out. Meanwhile, far away, the atmosphere within the city walls was heavy and oppressive. In a private room, an authority figure stood with his back turned, listening silently to a subordinate's report. The calm was short-lived. The man turned sharply, questioning the veracity of what he had just heard with utter disbelief and fury. The spy, kneeling and fearful, tried to justify the failure, implying that the situation involved unexpected variables related to the young master. The superior's frustration reached its limit. He gnashed his teeth, unable to contain his irritation at those flimsy excuses. The man looked down with contempt. He realized that he had made a fatal mistake in judging Cheon only by his lineage, underestimating what the boy was hiding. The man gritted his teeth with obvious frustration, unable to accept the way the situation had turned out. He looked at his own hand, realizing that there was no alternative but to intervene directly to correct the problem. With his fist clenched in fury, he vowed to resolve the matter personally. Yeoan Cheon would meet his definitive end as soon as he entered the academy. The tension of the previous night dissipated with the arrival of a peaceful dawn, illuminating the mountains and the isolated complex. Inside the room, Cheon slept soundly, recovering from the physical exhaustion caused by the recent change in his body. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open. Sleep vanished instantly, replaced by awareness of the important day that was beginning. The young man got up and pushed open the wooden window. The soft light outside confirmed that it was still early morning. The panel slid open with a soft creak, allowing the fresh air and morning mist to enter the room. Observing the horizon, Cheon felt the weight of the moment. The day of his entrance into the academy had finally arrived. A movement in the courtyard below caught his attention. Guard Zhang practiced his swordsmanship vigorously, cutting the air with precision. While watching the sequence of blows, Cheon mentally conversed with the nanomachine, confirming that it could analyze and store those movements. The machine offered the immediate transfer of knowledge, but the young man hesitated. Copying the secret technique of his loyal guardian without permission seemed dishonorable. However, the need for power spoke louder. He focused his gaze, setting aside his hesitation to seize the opportunity. Cheon ordered the start of the scan, but soon let out an exclamation of surprise upon noticing something unexpected in the execution of the technique. From above, he continued to observe attentively, analyzing each step of the guard in the empty courtyard with a new perspective. The young man was stunned to observe the scene before him, hardly believing what his eyes were capturing at that moment. From his bedroom window, Cheon watched carefully, realizing a unique opportunity unfolding in the outer courtyard. His concentration peaked as he tried to process every detail, refusing to miss any movement. The system in his mind reacted immediately, projecting combat simulations and accessing its vast internal database for comparison. In the courtyard, the guard continued his morning exercises, executing precise and disciplined movements with his blade. The protagonist understood that this was his chance. He decided that he needed to learn those techniques to ensure his own survival. Without hesitation, Cheon activated the nanomachine interface, ordering the immediate start of the visual scanning process. The swordsman moved fluidly, cutting the air in complex sequences that required years of practice to master. The implanted technology tracked every angle and speed, processing the information in real time through the boy's vision. Each blow struck by the guard was captured and decomposed by the system, creating a perfect digital record of that martial art. The analysis deepened rapidly, dissecting the essence of the technique as the data was absorbed through Cheon's irises. After about an hour of uninterrupted observation, the system confirmed that all techniques had been successfully copied and stored. Suddenly, a sharp stab hit his mind, an intense side effect of the massive transfer of information directly to his brain. Exhausted, Cheon slid to the floor. Despite the physical fatigue, he noted with relief that the assimilation process was becoming more bearable. As he caught his breath, the young man stared at his own hands, marveling at the new power and knowledge that now resided within him. Understanding flooded Cheon's mind. A smile of pure euphoria appeared on his face as he realized the potential of what he had just acquired. The body reacted before the thought was even complete. Driven by adrenaline, the young man shot across the room. His hand instinctively reached for the weapon. His fingers closed firmly and familiarly around the dagger's hilt. As he raised the blade, Cheon felt the technique flow into his memory. He knew exactly how to execute Guard Jang's movements. However, caution held him back. He peeked outside, aware that he needed to keep that new power a secret, away from the eyes of his involuntary teacher. Alone again, he adjusted his stance. His breathing calmed as he prepared his body to replicate the martial art. His eyes gleamed intensely. Absolute focus took over, activating the newly implanted knowledge. The first movement was explosive. The force applied was so great that the floor of the room shattered under the impact of his feet. Cheon became a blur. The dagger danced in the air, executing precise and swift cuts that left trails of light wherever they passed. The last blow cut through the air perfectly. He finished the sequence with an impeccable posture, like an experienced master. Upon stopping, the shock hit him. The young man looked at his own hands, trembling and in disbelief at the ability his body had just demonstrated. The nanomachine's voice echoed in his mind, explaining that the data transfer was directly reconfiguring his muscles. Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in his head. The physical adaptation process was taking a high and immediate toll. Unable to stand, Cheon collapsed. His entire body throbbed in agony as energy coursed through his nerves. Even trembling on the floor and suffering the side effects, a defiant smile remained. The pain was worth the power gained. The system warned about muscle damage resulting from overexertion. Cheon's legs trembled, unable to support his weight after executing the technique. Without the strength to stand, the young man collapsed, sitting on the bed. The frustration was evident. His mind possessed the knowledge, but his body was still too weak to execute it. The voice in his mind clarified the discrepancy. Although the technique download was complete, he had not yet physically mastered the movements needed to use it without hurting himself. It was a crucial distinction he needed to accept. Understanding the theory through the machine was just the beginning. Real practice would require much more than a simple mental command. Cold sweat ran down his face as he processed the information. The physical pain and complexity of the situation began to weigh on his stamina. However, he calculated the time remaining. With 2 hours before entering the academy, Cheon decided it was enough time to risk it and ordered the system to proceed. He tightened his clothes against his chest, mentally preparing himself. The decision was made, regardless of the physical cost the next step would demand. The entity offered a sedation option for the impending process. Cheon's body trembled slightly, anticipating the intensity of what was to come. A shockwave ran through his nerves before he could respond. The reaction was instantaneous, causing his muscles to contract involuntarily under the discharge of bluish energy. Cheon let out a heavy sigh, trying to maintain consciousness. He seemed resigned to face the discomfort needed to strengthen his body in time. Suddenly, a scream of agony escaped his throat. Cracking sounds echoed through the room as his bones and muscles were violently readjusted by the energy. The pain became excruciating, causing his eyes to roll back and his teeth to clench. Every fiber of his being trembled as the forced restructuring occurred without mercy. The process threw him to the ground, leaving him stretched out in a state of shock and absolute suffering, while the energy continued to work violently in his body. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the residence, the morning continued peacefully. The doctor carefully prepared a meal in the kitchen, oblivious to the chaos occurring in the young master's room. He tasted the broth, satisfied with the flavor and temperature. The normalcy of that scene contrasted brutally with the physical torture Cheon was enduring at that very moment. Garjiang prepared the ingredients with dedication. The rhythmic sound of the knife filled the silence as he enjoyed a rare moment of peace in the kitchen. His thoughts, however, wandered to the distant past. The man's gaze became nostalgic as he recalled a solemn promise made years ago. The image of Cheon's mother on her deathbed appeared in his mind. She had entrusted her son's safety entirely to his hands before departing. Jiang reflected on the boy's destiny. Now, that same boy was about to enter the dangerous demonic arts academy, fulfilling his destiny. Suddenly, a disturbance in the environment interrupted his reverie. The guard's eyes widened, sensing that something was wrong in the next room. The protective instinct spoke louder than any task. The knife was abandoned immediately, falling on the table as he moved. Zhang burst through the bedroom door violently. He shouted for the young master, fearing that the assassins had returned to finish the job. Upon entering, he came across Cheon's body stretched out on the wooden platform. The silence in the room was heavy and alarming. The guard rushed to check the boy's vital signs. Feeling his pulse, he noticed that Cheon was alive, but covered in cold sweat and exhausted. Confusion took over Jiang's face. He wondered what could have caused such a physical collapse, since there were no signs of intruders. It was then that his attention turned to the floor. He noticed strange and deep marks on the wood, near where the young man was. Zhang crouched down and touched the depressions with his fingertips. The solid wood had been crushed by a concentrated and precise force. The man observed the position of the marks, trying to understand the mechanics of what had occurred there. That kind of damage was not accidental. A smile of disbelief and recognition appeared on his face. He realized that those traces on the floor were identical to those left by his own martial arts training. Suddenly, Cheon's body reacted with a violent spasm. The young master awoke in shock, with wide eyes and panting breath. Cheon woke up suddenly, his body still reacting to the recent physical shock. Air filled his lungs abruptly as he tried to get his bearings after the procedure. Catching his breath, the young man promised himself that he would never repeat that agonizing experience. The price of that pain had been too high to pay twice. As the artificial voice confirmed the success of the first stage, Cheon looked around. He wondered worriedly if Guarjiang had been there during his collapse. Putting his doubts aside, he reached for the dagger on the floor. It was the crucial moment to test the practical results of the body restructuring. The young man positioned himself in the center of the room, the blade firm in his hand. His body felt different, lighter and more responsive than ever. He closed his eyes and controlled his breathing, exhaling slowly. Absolute focus was needed to access the movements that now resided in his muscle memory. His eyes snapped open with sharp intensity. The combat stance was assumed instinctively, ready to begin the sequence of attacks. Cheon's body exploded into motion. He realized with surprise that, even without internal energy, the external technique and physical strength had been perfectly assimilated. The blade cut through the air with surgical precision. Every muscle responded exactly as it should, executing the attack without the slightest hesitation. A smile of satisfaction and confidence appeared on his face. The effectiveness and speed of the movements exceeded his expectations. The suffering had been worth it. He continued the sequence, flowing from one stance to another. The dagger danced in his hands, cutting through the space around him with controlled violence. With impressive dexterity, Cheon spun the weapon between his fingers. The control over the object was total, feeling it as a natural extension of his arm. He combined the blade work with a high and powerful kick. The mental simulation indicated that the sequence of movements was finally complete. Cheon's foot descended towards the ground with overwhelming pressure. The final impact would test the true stability of his new physical base. He landed firmly, the brute force of the movement shattering the wood of the floor. The power that now ran through his veins was undeniable and destructive. Cheon observed the result of his test with apprehension. Cold sweat ran down his face as he realized the gravity of what he had just done. The wooden floor was ruined. The boards had been shattered by the brute force of his movements, leaving a deep and undeniable mark on the floor. The young man crouched before the damage, worried. He knew he had no skill to fix it, and that Guard Jang would certainly notice the destruction. Before he could think of a solution, knocks on the door startled him. A voice announced the arrival of breakfast, catching him completely off guard. Panic set in. Without better options, Cheon desperately tried to cover the broken boards with his own feet, stomping firmly to hide the evidence. The door opened and Jang entered with a cordial smile. The guard seemed oblivious to his master's nervousness, focused only on serving the meal. Acting quickly, Cheon dragged the heavy table over the damaged spot. Jang watched the scene with strangeness, confused by the sudden change in the young man's routine. The protagonist tried to justify his strange attitude with an awkward smile. He needed to act naturally so that the guard wouldn't look down. Maintaining a forced, cheerful expression, Cheon hoped his excuse would stick. The nervousness was visible, but he tried to disguise it. Attention, fortunately, turned to the tray. The aroma of freshly prepared meat and rice filled the room. Cheon's eyes widened instantly. His body, still adapting to the recent changes, reacted viscerally to the presence of food. An overwhelming hunger took over him. The young man felt his stomach protest violently, demanding immediate nutrients to sustain his new physiology. Forgetting any etiquette, he attacked the food voraciously. Jang watched in silence, surprised as his master devoured every piece with unusual energy. The meal disappeared in a matter of seconds. Cheon drank the water greedily, barely stopping to breathe, under the watchful eye of his guardian. Satisfied, the young man placed the cutlery delicately on the table. He thanked the guard, feeling his strength finally stabilize. Guard Jang sighed deeply, with an expression of disappointment. Cheon froze, feeling that his mistake was about to be exposed. Panic took over the young man's face. He realized that there would be no way to keep his secret hidden any longer. Desperate, Cheon tried to stop the other's advance. However, Jang ignored the protests and walked resolutely to the displaced table. The guard dragged the heavy furniture with ease. The shattered wood and the hole in the floor were revealed, confirming the destruction. Jang widened his eyes, shocked. He stared at the physical proof of a raw power that he did not expect to find there. Cheon's mind raced to the worst-case scenario. He feared being accused of practicing forbidden and dangerous arts to obtain such sudden strength. However, the reaction was unexpected. Jang smiled warmly and congratulated the young master, interpreting the damage as the result of hard and dedicated training. Cheon was stunned by the turnaround. Instead of punishment, he received approval, and emotion began to choke his throat. The guard then handed him an envelope. He explained that it contained valuable secrets to assist in the circulation of internal energy. The older man maintained a gentle and encouraging look. He was willing to support the growth of his protege at any cost. Cheon's hands trembled as he held the gift. Drops of tears fell on the paper, staining the surface of the envelope. The young man's emotional barrier broke completely. He sobbed openly, deeply touched by the loyalty and care of his subordinate. Zhang just watched with an understanding smile. He allowed that moment of vulnerability without making any judgment. Later, huddled under the covers, Cheon tried to regain his dignity. He swore to himself that this weakness would not be repeated. Tiredness finally overcame the emotional turmoil. The young man fell asleep, determined to honor the trust placed in him. Jiang collected the tray with the empty bowls, ending that brief moment of connection. The guard walked towards the door, leaving the young man alone with his thoughts in the silent room. Before leaving, there was an almost imperceptible pause, marking the end of that unexpected interaction. Tears streamed freely down Cheon's face. Gratitude for the support he received overflowed in his chest. The door closed with a heavy, definitive sound, isolating the boy again. Cheon wiped his face with the sleeve of his robe, drying the traces of his crying. He took a deep breath and raised his head. He needed to regain his composure and move forward. As the guard walked away across the courtyard, Cheon's mind wandered, reflecting on his mother's absence. Far away, under the vast sky of the fortress, the day brought new challenges for the cult members. A crowd gathered in front of the main pavilion, the air vibrating with murmurs of anxiety and expectation. The candidates, identified by numbers, exchanged nervous glances, sweating coldly before what was to come. Firm steps echoed in the room, announcing the arrival of someone with unquestionable authority. The newcomer observed the mass of people with obvious disgust, twisting his mouth in disapproval. The instructor stared at the group, making it clear that he considered the presence of those candidates foolish. Fury burned in his eyes as he radiated crushing pressure over the terrified crowd. In the courtyard of the Great Hall, an authority figure waited before the seat of honor. The solemn atmosphere indicated the beginning of a crucial event for the sect's hierarchy. The instructor watched those present with a smile of someone who held absolute power at that moment. He seemed to silently assess the value of each candidate gathered there. Before him, aligned by order of ranking, were the elite disciples. They were the prodigies of the great families, visually distinguished from the common mass of students. The first in line, from the Shadow Sect, maintained an impenetrable expression. His rigid posture exuded military discipline and absolute focus. Right behind, the representative of the Sword Clan displayed a smug smile. He seemed to face the imminent competition with a confidence bordering on arrogance. The third candidate, however, did not hide her displeasure. Impatience showed on her face as she openly complained about the irritating situation. The fourth student remained stoic and silent. His intense and serious gaze suggested that he was not there to socialize, but to fulfill a duty. Yuchan, from the Saber Sect, maintained a disconcerting calm. His relaxed expression and closed eyes contrasted with the natural tension of the environment. The man in charge, however, seemed to have his attention turned to something beyond that display of power from the favorites, maintaining a vigilant posture. In the middle of the crowd, the attention of the common students wandered. They pointed and whispered, surprised to notice the presence of someone specific among them. The mockery spread quickly among the group. They mocked the candidate's supposed lack of martial skill, betting on his immediate elimination. Cheon heard every word of the insults. Far from being intimidated, he allowed them to laugh, aware that underestimating him would be his rival's biggest mistake. The young protagonist remained isolated at the back of the courtyard, holding his insignia. The physical distance reflected his position as an outcast in that hostile environment. With his arms crossed and a shadowed look, Cheon processed the collective mockery. He found the situation curious, transforming the contempt of others into fuel for his determination. The crowd of candidates filled the courtyard, forming a sea of anxious voices. The air vibrated with the tension of waiting, as everyone awaited the start of the ceremony. In the middle of that chaos, Cheon remained still. He felt like a stranger among those people, aware that his presence there was a cause for discord. It wasn't long before the whispers started. The other candidates exchanged malicious glances and low comments, openly judging the young man's presence among them. Cheon, however, just snorted with disdain. He decided to close his ears to the childish mockery, refusing to let those provocations shake him. His isolation, however, did not go unnoticed. From afar, an imposing figure with red hair watched the solitary boy who stood out in the middle of the way. The man seemed to find the scene interesting. A smile of intrigue curved his lips as he silently assessed the posture of the isolated young man. Suddenly, the deep sound of trumpets broke the small talk. The signal echoed loudly, silencing the crowd instantly and announcing the start of the event. Everyone's attention immediately turned to the main pavilion. The agitation took over the courtyard as they realized that the central figure was about to emerge. Heavy, rhythmic steps resonated on the stone floor. The authority of those footsteps was unmistakable, announcing the arrival of someone with supreme power. The leadership figures emerged from the shadows, walking towards the light. They were the masters who ruled that world, advancing with an overwhelming presence. The candidates held their breath at the sight. The mere vision of those men caused shock and respect to take over their faces. No one dared to look away or make a sound. The aura emanating from the group at the top of the staircase was intense, paralyzing the young aspirants where they stood. One of the leaders maintained a stern and impenetrable expression. His presence exuded a cold dignity that dispensed with any need for words. Beside him, formidable-looking warriors revealed themselves. The masked man and the swordsman commanded respect just with their threatening postures. The red-haired man recoiled, visibly annoyed by the young man's lack of composure. Cheon, in turn, stumbled on his own feet, barely managing to keep his balance before that imposing figure. Indignation took over the noble's face, who did not contain his revulsion. He furiously questioned why the young man presented himself in those deplorable conditions, accusing him of being nothing more than a drunk. Ignoring the reprimand, Cheon sobbed and continued to limp through the courtyard. His posture was sloppy and fragile, dragging his leg while firmly holding his gourd of drink as if it were his only support. Suddenly, an oppressive presence cut through the tension of the moment. The red-haired man froze, feeling the penetrating gaze of a new masked figure who had silently appeared behind them. The newcomer didn't need many words to command immediate respect. Ragyam Ma, the feared Lord of Darkness and head of the royal guard, demanded silence with an authority that chilled those present to the bone. At the top of the main platform, a subtle movement of royal robes indicated that the central figure of the ceremony was settling in. The simple change in posture was enough to attract everyone's attention. The patriarch was seated on his throne, emanating an aura of power so heavy that it seemed physical. His expression was stern and impenetrable, watching his subjects with the gravity of an absolute ruler. The spiritual pressure emitted by the leaders caused the disciples gathered in the courtyard to tremble uncontrollably. Fear and respect paralyzed the crowd, who felt the weight of that overwhelming authority. The atmosphere became so suffocating that many didn't even dare to raise their heads. The mere sight of the patriarch and his overwhelming power was too much for the young candidates to bear, leaving only whispers of dread. Ragyam Ma raised his hand, projecting his voice with absolute authority over the courtyard. His cry for silence reverberated like thunder, instantly silencing any remaining murmurs or unrest. The order was obeyed immediately, plunging the place into absolute stillness. All eyes remained lowered before the supreme figures who watched from the top of the staircase, consolidating the sect's hierarchy. With the crowd properly controlled, the Lord of Darkness turned to the throne. He bowed deeply and respectfully, demonstrating his total loyalty to the one above all. The supreme leader's hands clenched tightly on the fabric of his royal robes. There was a palpable tension emanating from him, suggesting that his patience or emotions were being contained with effort. The ruler's eyes gleamed with an intense and supernatural inner energy. His gaze seemed capable of seeing through anyone's soul, assessing every presence in that sacred place. An overwhelming aura began to emanate from his body, enveloping him in flames of purple spiritual energy. The true power of the sect leader manifested, making the very air vibrate around him. The announcement that a breathing technique would be the focus of the test sent an immediate shock through the crowd. The candidates recoiled, surprised by the sudden demand. Even the most prepared felt the weight of the revelation. The tension in the air increased instantly, leaving everyone in a state of maximum alert before the proposed challenge. The speaker's voice echoed through the courtyard, proclaiming that this force would be the engine that drove the cult. The words carried a weight that made the very ground tremble. Inflamed by the speech, the candidates responded with fanatical fervor. Fists were raised and cries of loyalty filled the space, demonstrating the collective ambition to serve the cult. In a gesture of total submission, the mass bowed before the authority on the platform. It was the expected protocol for those who wished to ascend in the hierarchy. The leader watched the demonstration of obedience with a stern and calculating gaze. He assessed every movement of the crowd, looking for any sign of weakness or hesitation. However, amidst the sea of lowered heads, Cheon remained still. He stood out not for servitude, but for his complete lack of reaction to the general command. While everyone around him touched the ground in respect, the young man continued to stand. His erect posture made him an obvious and solitary target in the middle of the submissive crowd. The insolence did not go unnoticed. At the top of the staircase, the authority figure turned slowly, drawn to the only person who dared not to bow before them. Cheon immediately realized that he was being watched. His eyes sharpened, catching the change in the atmosphere and the imminent danger that his attitude had attracted. However, instead of showing fear, he just let out a tired sigh. The biting cold of the place seemed to bother him more than the pressure from the authorities or the risk of death. The young man maintained his indifferent expression, ignoring the gravity of the situation. To him, all that pomp and circumstance seemed like just unnecessary boredom. The ceremony was abruptly interrupted by a new voice coming from the platform. The red-haired man declared the end of the formalities, announcing that the real test was about to begin. The sudden change of tone and verbal aggression caught the candidates off guard. Fear returned to their faces when they realized that the time for talk was over. An oppressive energy began to emanate from the leader, making the air vibrate around him. He was ready to impose his will, dispensing with words in favor of a demonstration of brute force. The instructor could barely contain his impatience. Irritation pulsed visibly on his face as he watched the candidate's hesitation. With his arms crossed, he dictated the rules firmly. He made it clear that each stage would have its own rigorous and eliminatory exam. A murmur of apprehension ran through the crowd. The young men realized with dread that they would have only a single chance of success with no margin for error. The man smiled in a predatory way. He seemed to revel in the fear and uncertainty that his words planted in the aspirants. Suddenly, the speech was interrupted. A lone hand rose in the middle of the mass of people, defying the established protocol. One of the candidates drew attention to himself. With a relaxed and confident posture, he stood out from the general nervousness as he asked to speak. The red-haired instructor stopped, surprised. He looked down, visibly bothered by the unexpected interruption of his lecture. An electric tension, almost palpable, arose in the air. The heightened senses of some present caught the sudden change in the atmosphere. The young candidate smiled slyly. He addressed the examiner with a politeness that barely disguised his audacity and provocation. The instructor's response was immediate and overwhelming. An aura of flames erupted from his body, physically manifesting his fury at the insolence. His eyes locked onto the questioner with lethal intensity. The spiritual pressure in the place increased drastically, focused on crushing the challenge. The other participants were paralyzed with shock. The mere presence of that aggressive energy was enough to intimidate those nearby. The instructor stared at the small group that dared to stand out. The silent confrontation established a clear barrier between them and the rest of the crowd. However, the man at the top of the stairs remained in control. He stated arrogantly that he already foresaw exactly what the boy's question would be. The other candidates just watched, sweating coldly. The confusion and fear on their faces showed that they were completely lost in the situation. The instructor revealed the prize contained in the ornate box. The glowing sphere emanated a golden energy that immediately captured the attention of everyone present. Cheon was stunned to see the object. He recognized the relic instantly, realizing that it possessed an invaluable worth, far beyond what he expected to find there. Murmurs of doubt and speculation began to run through the crowd. The other candidates whispered, trying to understand the true nature of that treasure. The young man felt his hand tremble with anxiety and expectation. The simple presence of that item awakened in him a dangerous ambition and an urgent need. The red-haired man opened his arms, drawing attention to the structure of the test. He began to explain how the hierarchy of that place would work. He gestured, indicating that the academy consisted of a total of 5 floors. Each level represented a different stage of learning and authority. The promise of learning divine techniques inflamed the spirits of the students. The candidates vibrated with excitement, seeing there the chance to obtain absolute power. Cheon's expression, however, hardened with seriousness. He knew that he needed to access that knowledge not for glory, but as the only way to guarantee his survival. The instructor, however, displayed a malicious and predatory smile. There was a cruel caveat in that tempting offer, something he seemed to take pleasure in revealing. As the tension increased in the silent courtyard, Cheon completely ignored the solemn atmosphere. He brought his canteen to his mouth, drinking carelessly. A loud and sonorous burp broke the silence. The young man's rude gesture demonstrated total indifference to the gravity of the situation or the authority of the instructor. The man continued with his speech, detailing the final reward. He explained how the reward system would work for those who survived. The following revelation left the candidates stupefied. The academy offered the real possibility of ascending to status and social positions previously unattainable for them. One of the students finally understood the brutal truth behind the rules. In there, origins didn't matter. It would be a pure battle for the survival of the fittest. With disdain, the instructor launched a final challenge to crush their hopes. He stated categorically that the last level was a goal that none of them would ever reach. The dust settled in the training yard, revealing the instructor and his assistant at the top of the staircase. The silence that followed the interruption was heavy, as everyone awaited the authorities' reaction. The assistant watched the boy with a mixture of disbelief and exasperation. The young man's blatant attitude completely escaped the rigid protocol he expected from the candidates. The head instructor, however, reacted differently. A smirk appeared on his face, demonstrating that the boy's audacity amused him rather than offended him. Cheon, noticing the change in the atmosphere, sharpened his senses. His heart raced as he focused all his attention, preparing for what was to come next. The instructor turned to the crowd of students, assuming an imposing posture. He was about to dictate the brutal rules of how things would work in that academy. The amused expression disappeared, giving way to a cold and calculating seriousness. The man made it clear, just with a look, that the game was over. The young man blinked, confused by the sudden change in tone. He remained static, trying to process the gravity of the situation unfolding before him. Suddenly, shock took over his expression. The instructor's following words caught him completely off guard, shaking his momentary confidence. A murmur of disbelief swept through the entire courtyard. The crowd of candidates erupted in an uproar, refusing to believe the absurd demand they had just heard. Panic quickly turned into indignation among the groups. The students began to question the injustice of being subjected to a deadly test without receiving any prior training. The instructor did not tolerate the insubordination and raised his voice. He decreed that any failure would result in immediate expulsion, declaring them unworthy of even the lowest warrior title. His fury exploded in a scream that silenced the complaints. He made it clear that weakness would have no place there, demanding absolute perfection from the start. Cheon felt a cold sweat run down his face. The reality of that test was much more severe and relentless than he had calculated. The instructor, however, seemed to vibrate with the fear he instilled in the students. He smiled maniacally, reveling in the despair and tension that now dominated the environment. Faced with that overwhelming pressure, the young man's fist clenched tightly. Determination overcame fear. He needed to pass that test, no matter the cost. Cheon understood the crushing weight of the situation. Failing here meant falling to the lowest level of the hierarchy, a fate he needed to avoid at all costs. In the midst of the tense crowd, one candidate watched the scene with scorn. The impending chaos seemed to amuse her in a disturbing way. She concluded that the test's brutality would play to her advantage. Thus, she wouldn't need to get her own hands dirty to eliminate the one she considered a despicable worm. her eyes narrowed with focused malice. The elimination of her target by the exam's rules would be the perfect, clean outcome she desired. Everyone's attention turned to a new figure ascending the steps. A woman carrying a musical instrument solemnly joined the examiners at the top. This was So Hong, the fifth elder and leader of the musicians sect. Her refined elegance contrasted with the inherent danger of her high position in the cult. The examiners were now aligned, looking down at the candidates below. The barrier between the judges and the aspirants was visually established. The red-haired instructor did the honors, announcing the elder's presence in a booming voice to ensure everyone recognized the authority present. Murmurs swept through the crowd of candidates. The gathering of figures of such high caliber in the same location made everyone nervous and apprehensive. It was an extraordinary event, as the elder rarely appeared in public. Her mere presence indicated that the test would be exceptionally rigorous. Suddenly, a wave of sound hit everyone. Cheon recognized the attack immediately, while the candidates around him covered their ears in agony. The instructor watched the onset of collective suffering with a sadistic smile. He seemed to appreciate the panic that was setting in among the youths. Cheon gritted his teeth, sweat running down his face as he struggled to maintain consciousness. The physical pressure exerted by the sound was overwhelming. The elder plucked her instrument, releasing visible waves of energy with a cruel smile. She was actively testing the limits of each participant. The instructor shouted the final conditions over the deafening noise. Survival was key. Only those who could withstand the musical force without fainting would pass the first phase. The elder's fingers struck the strings with calculated violence. It wasn't just music, but a shockwave designed to test physical and mental limits. The sonic pressure exploded across the courtyard, hitting the candidates like a solid wall. The impact was so strong that the air seemed to vibrate with hostility, forcing everyone to recoil. The resistance of most was short-lived. One by one, the aspirants lost consciousness, their bodies giving way as the melody invaded their minds without mercy. Cheon felt the attack reverberate in his bones. The young man gritted his teeth, desperately fighting to maintain focus and not succumb to the dizziness that assailed him. The sound of bodies colliding against the ground became constant. Those who were still trying to resist clutched their chests, feeling their hearts fail under the crushing pressure. The pain became unbearable for many. One candidate screamed in agony, covering his ears in a futile attempt to block the sound that penetrated his internal defenses. The instructor watched the massacre coldly. Before her, dozens of hopefuls lay defeated on the ground, proving that they were not worthy of advancing in the test. However, there was a notable exception. A long-haired man smiled, seeming genuinely impressed with the power of the attack, rather than frightened. The musician didn't stop when she noticed the resistance. She accelerated the rhythm, her fingers moving to increase the pressure on the few who remained standing. The mysterious candidate, however, simply closed his eyes. He seemed to appreciate the deadly melody, demonstrating a disturbing and arrogant calm amidst the chaos. The instrument groaned under the strain. Each note cut through the air with more speed, seeking to break the mental guard of anyone who still dared to resist. The difference in power became evident. While his neighbor trembled and sweated, the man in green remained relaxed, completely immune to the sonic torment. For the others, the physical exertion reached the critical limit. The pressure distorted features, requiring absolute concentration just to maintain breathing. One candidate in particular clenched her eyes shut with extreme force. Her body trembled as she channeled all her internal energy, stubbornly refusing to yield. Her reaction, however, caused astonishment. So Hong interrupted her stern posture, visibly shocked and questioning the nature of that unexpected resistance. Agony spread rapidly among the remaining participants. The sonic pressure became unbearable, forcing them to cover their ears in a desperate and futile attempt to block the excruciating pain. The examiner, however, noticed an anomaly. Her expression of concentration transformed into shock and visible strain as she noted that her devastating technique was not having the absolute effect she expected. While the other candidates collapsed around him, unable to withstand the auditory torture, Cheon remained standing. He stood out as an island of stability amidst the collective collapse of the aspirants. The young man himself did not seem to understand the situation. He looked at his own hands, perplexed and confused as to why he didn't feel the agony that had brought down all his competitors. The courtyard, once filled with hopeful warriors, had transformed into a field of fallen bodies. Only Cheon remained standing in that vast space, the sole conscious survivor of the Sonic massacre. Cheon observed the desolate scene around him with disbelief. He tried to process how, among so many martial artists, only he had escaped unscathed from that invisible attack. It was then that the answer arose internally. The system in his body alerted him that, upon detecting sound frequencies capable of causing severe physical damage, it automatically activated an emergency defense protocol. The realization hit the boy immediately. He realized that the entity had completely blocked his physical hearing to isolate him from the lethal waves emitted by the examiner's instrument. Even deaf to the outside world, internal communication remained clear. The artificial voice explained that it was transmitting the information directly to his cerebral cortex, bypassing the need for ears. With his senses protected, Cheon turned his attention to the platform. He stared at the source of the devastating attack, now completely immune to the technique that continued to sweep the courtyard. At the top of the platform, the dynamic between the instructors shifted. While the musician maintained the attack with increasing difficulty, her companion watched the scene, noting the flaw in her offense. The red-bearded man fixed his gaze on the young survivor. The inexplicable resistance of that candidate sparked a sharp and assessing interest in him. The sound waves continued to be fired violently, but broke uselessly against Cheon. He remained still and stoic, a defiant presence in the face of the sect's overwhelming power. A smile of satisfaction and intrigue appeared on the observer's face. Finding someone capable of withstanding that deadly trial was a surprise he clearly didn't expect, but seemed to appreciate. The reality for the stragglers, however, was brutal. Those who were still trying to resist began to bleed from their ears, highlighting the mortal danger from which the system had just saved Cheon. The pressure exerted by the sonic attack was unbearable for most. Several candidates lost control of their internal energy, succumbing to serious injuries and spitting blood in the process. Even those with greater resistance struggled desperately to maintain consciousness. The young woman in green gritted her teeth, using all her willpower just to remain seated. However, something broke her momentary concentration. Amidst the chaos and pain, she noticed a movement that shouldn't have been possible under those conditions. The surprise was so great that it made her turn her face sharply. What her senses captured defied the logic of that deadly test. Other participants, although paralyzed by the effort of resisting the sound waves, also noticed the anomaly. The tension in the air instantly changed from suffering to pure astonishment. The instructor watched the scene with technical apprehension. She knew that abandoning the meditation posture during that chi adjustment could cause a fatal reverse flow of energy. However, Cheon completely ignored the mortal danger. To everyone's disbelief, the young man simply stood up, facing the temple as if the sonic attack didn't exist. Confusion took over the crowd. No one could understand how someone known for not having internal energy could walk so calmly, while the strongest could barely breathe. Disbelief turned into visceral shock for the observers. Seeing that young man, considered inferior, overcome the test with such ease seemed like a hallucination. The impossible was happening. That single act of defiance shook everyone's understanding of what was happening in that courtyard.